When did things begin to go wrong, I wonder? Why am I here? My only sin was loving you. You were the only purpose in my life. If I could begin again, I won't love you again. The otome isekai genre was born over 7 years ago now. I was there from the very beginning, from the times when I had to hunt for new installments to nowadays, where I can't possibly read every single webtoon that piques my interest. The novelty has worn off, and yet I can't stop. Help me. By now, most stories blur into one, but a couple of few have stood out to me as a Mount Rushmore. By all accounts, those should be the well-written masterpieces, the best of the best. For me, one of them is The Abandoned Empress though, a webtoon that is widely regarded as quite a letdown. It was a shining star when it first came out, but over its runtime it lost most of the audience's goodwill. The otome isekai Reddit is full of people asking why people hate it so much, and the responses drip with genuine disappointment. They all once believed in this work, but most admit to dropping it. This is in no small part due to the choice of the manhwa's male lead, but this was by far not the only issue among the many wasted characters and the rushed ending. But some people do still like it, maybe even love it. I'm frankly not sure where to put myself on the spectrum, because after all these years I still remember most characters and the premise vividly. I even remembered the female lead's name, which is rare, and yet I can't bring myself to say that the complete work is satisfying in itself. And yes, the male lead is part of it, but I don't think he is what broke the story, given that most of it wouldn't work without him. And today, I'm going to sort out my feelings about the story, and you all have to listen to me do it. Let's dive into it. The Abandoned Empress is a manhwa by the artist Ina, adapted from the novel of the same name by Yuna Jeong, but for the sake of this video I would treat the manhwa/webtoon as a standalone. I might bring up the novel, but I won't go into detail and I haven't read it. Our story begins with an execution. Not just any person is on trial. It is Aristia Monique, the queen of the empire, who is accused of treason. The crime she committed is an attempted assassination on the emperor, her own husband. Her gaze wanders over to see the man she loved so much. The emperor is hugging another woman. His smile turns mocking as he glances at Aristia. The guillotine falls, ending the life of a woman who was raised to be the empress since her very birth. How did it get to this? Years ago, a divine oracle announced that the daughter of Marcus Monique would be the crown prince's fated partner. As such, they were engaged. But as the new emperor took his crown and Aristia studied to take on the position by his side, a girl from a different world appeared from the lake. The temple announced that she was sent by God, and so she was made empress, while Aristia was relegated to be the queen instead. The story sets up high emotional stakes early. We sympathize with Aristia and can understand why she might be full of bitterness over being discarded in favor of Jeon, a young and cheerful but also naive woman. Aristia has not only lost her purpose, but also the man she loves to this divine intervention. Jeon also seems blissfully unaware that her arrival has hurt Aristia, and that, being unable to fulfill her duties as the empress, her work is pushed onto our female lead as well. Despite that, we do see her as being sympathetic as well, being barely 18 years old and losing her family because she is suddenly thrust into a different world. It makes sense for them to not get along especially well. However, the person actually pushing things to an escalation is the emperor himself. Ruvelis Kamaludin Shana Kastina, or for short, Ruve. It is not only enough for him to ignore Aristia's affection and dote on another woman in front of her, he also regularly admonishes Aristia, blames her for things out of her control, and on occasion physically abuses her. And if you would think that he can't get worse than that, I would encourage you to think again, because Ruve assumes that Aristia only cares about him because she wishes to bear his child and be the mother of the future emperor. And so, despite hating her, he pushes her to sleep with him. Aristia is deeply uncomfortable with this, only to change her mind when she believes that she might be able to win his love this way. Ruve immediately discards any certainty of her consent again by telling her that she means nothing to him and then making the entire process as painful as possible for her. I'm gonna be frank, this scene does imply that Aristia is in favor of it because she is willing to do everything Ruve asks to please him, but I would still argue that she is being assaulted here, given the power structure and the moment. She later does confirm that he did not force her, but it does look sketchy, and he certainly takes advantage of her in a vulnerable state. Aristia becomes pregnant from this incident, much to Ruve's dismay. He's a real keeper, isn't he? He ignores her as much as he can, which breaks Aristia's heart. At this time, she becomes ill, having headaches, being dizzy. This is important for later, so remember that. Ruve calls her to his office a while later, announcing, in his usual tactful manner, that he won't make her child the heir to the throne. Aristia then becomes even more nauseous, almost faints in thoughts. Ruve, showing a single moment of common sense, actually takes the extra step to catch her, only for Ji-yoon to come in and storm off, assuming her lover is betraying her. Ruve goes to follow her, bumps into Aristia, and she merely stumbles, but there's blood. And as Aristia wakes up, she realizes that she lost her child. She is also told that she is unlikely to ever bear one again. This devastates Aristia, who realizes that even if she had had this child, Ruve, who ran after Ji-yoon instead of helping her, would never have loved her. Before she can get over this grief though, she hears that Ji-yoon is with child, and that the entire palace is rejoicing with celebration. Aristia finally breaks after everything she's been through. And finally, Marcus Monique, her father, appears. He consoles her and promises to bring her back home, away from the pain and suffering in the palace. Aristia's outlook lightens as she starts to believe she might be allowed to be happy again. But we already know how the story ends. 4 days later, Ji-yoon is attacked by masked men as she visits the town. She too loses her child. And the one arrested, the alleged mastermind behind this attack, was Marcus Monique. As Aristia goes to plead with the Emperor, he shows his usual indifference. No, worse. He seems almost mocking, joyful at her pain. He orders Aristia to kneel and lick his shoe, promising to spare her father if she did. Of course, Aristia obeys. Oh, how unfortunate. Your father is already dead. It's the moment Aristia finally does what readers have hoped for from the very beginning. She takes out her hairpin and stabs Ruve. Unfortunately, she doesn't manage to end his life. But we already knew that too. Aristia is executed for treason. As the guillotine falls, her last wish is to turn back time, to do things differently, to never love this man who was her downfall again. And time, for some divine reason, obeys. Aristia awakens as a voice sounds in her head, promising that she, protected by this voice, will be able to carve out her own path. Aristia finds herself back at home, at the age of 10. The first thing she does, of course, is run to her father and fall into his arms. She assumes she might be dreaming, but is just glad to have returned to the home she loved so much. But nightmares plague her, nightmares of a certain emperor. It's here that Aristia assumes that God, or Vita, as the god of the Cantina Empire is called, must have sent her this dream. She visits the temple, where Vita speaks to her directly. Vita confirms that Aristia has turned back in time. Why? Because Vita intended for Ji-yoon to be born into this world, but they messed up and she went somewhere else. During that time, Ruve, who was meant to be connected to Ji-yoon by a string of fate, ended up tangling with Aristia instead. If this is what strings of fate look like, I hope they never find me. Aristia seems to think the same and is naturally enraged, because she's now told that Vita simply had her fall for Ruve to fill the void until Jeong appeared. She swears that she will refuse such a fate, even as Vita insists that humans cannot resist any decision made for them. Out of pity, Vita grants her a divine name, one that will allow Aristia to be the exception, to have her fate be what she wishes it to be. Her new name will be Aristia Pioneer La Monique. Tia. Aristia awakens in a temple. Seeing her father and her maid worrying about her, she frees herself from her despair and vows to live a different life this time. However, things aren't that easy. The temple received a new oracle announcing Aristia's divine name, and they already spread it. Bad memories well up as Aristia arrives at the palace, but her father simply picks her up as they go to meet Mirkan, the 33rd Emperor of the Castina Empire, Ruve's father. They also meet Duke de Ras, commander of the 1st Night Squadron, and Duke de Verita, the Chancellor who, along with House Monique, lead the imperial faction of the Empire. Here, Aristia immediately does something incredibly stupid. The Emperor suggests raising the taxes, and Aristia, with the knowledge from the first timeline, reminds him of the drought that will take place in the future. For the sake of the people, Aristia also suggests a luxury tax to help the Empire's finances, an idea that Duke Veritas' second son originally came up with. The Emperor is impressed, but immediately reveals that he is indeed that moron's father by indirectly threatening Aristia, pointing out that her divine name gives her the right to inherit the throne. Naturally, she cannot be his son's rival, and so Aristia must become the next emperor's wife, even if she protests, which she tries. Speaking of the devil, we finally get to meet Ruve in this timeline, though I presume no one really looked forward to his appearance. Being upset that he wasn't invited to that meeting Aristia attended, he runs into Aristia in the gardens, where she, for some reason, ran around alone. Ruve, barely being 14 here, doesn't seem like much of a threat. He already dislikes Aristia though, and complains about everyone praising her. He's a bit cold here, but arguably more upset that Aristia is just staring at him instead of replying. He remains fully unaware of the fact that Aristia is terrified of him, and simply leaves as our female lead breaks down with old memories clouding her mind. Great second first impressions. Aristia once again vows to break the claws of fate to avoid that old life catching up to her. Here, the story introduces one of the two secondary male leads, one being Alendis de Verita, the second son of Duke de Verita. He heard about Aristia's genius idea, which she stole from him, and visits to check if she's truly as clever as he hoped she'd be. He joyfully suggests being friends, almost overwhelming Aristia with his sudden interest. A mere minute later, he suggests marriage. Notably, this is treated like a joke as Aristia's father comes in and blocks him. The story does not point out that this suggestion could very much split the imperial faction in two if the Chancellor's son tries to date the Crown Prince's fiancée. Even Aristia, who is called a genius and politically savvy numerous times, apparently isn't concerned about this. Alendis points out that people are already slandering Aristia, and that he would be willing to protect her if she happens to lose her position as the Crown Prince's fiancée. This happens a bit quickly, doesn't it? But Aristia is just glad she made her first friend. Meanwhile, Ruve is upset because he wonders if Aristia forgot who he was, because of that short meeting a few chapters ago. Most readers already forgot. He sure didn't, and assumes Aristia must have ignored him on purpose. Aristia, unaware of this moron's assumptions, watches Alendis train his sword skills, and then decides that she wishes to be a knight too. She tells her father that she hopes to avoid Ruve entirely and not be empress. The story now introduces Duke de Ras's wife, the Emperor's younger sister and Ruve's aunt, as well as Duke de Ras's second son, Karsane. Best boy Karsane. A loud and boisterous knight who cares little for his mother's complaints and attempts to teach him etiquette. Duchess de Ras visits the palace and meets her nephew, who is currently 14 years old as we recall. He's relatively happy to see her, welcomes her open-mindedly, and even shuts down her weird self-pitying comments about not being welcome in the family. In return, This woman calls him a disappointment to his dead mother and says that his fiancée, Aristia, is so much more successful than he will ever be. Charming. We'll get to her later. Anyway, meanwhile Aristia trains sword fighting until she gets blisters, which gives Alandis a nice opportunity to hold her hand. As the months pass, she improves while getting closer to Alandis, who invents white chocolates for her. The scene cuts to Ruve, who seems to be lost in memories. We see him as a child, a little baby, who is being consoled by a red-haired woman as he cries. And we find out that this woman is Jeremiah Lamonique, Aristia's mother, who died in front of him, begging him to protect her daughter. He meets Aristia in the palace again. She, once again, annoys Ruve by being quiet and barely responding. He then finds out that the only reason his father invited him for tea is because Aristia is here, implying that his father never invites him otherwise. We'll get to that too. During the tea time, Aristia is so tense that she drops her cup on Ruve. He gets mad, but simply storms off. Aristia, again, confirms that she doesn't like spending time with him. Aristia spends more time with Alandis, who makes a knight's vow to her after they find a romantic book about the matter. It seems like one of our male leads is gaining ground. Let's see where that goes. A year passes, and Aristia accompanies her father to the palace again. She runs into someone. I wonder who... Who am I kidding? We all know it's Ruve. You saw the thumbnail, you know what's going on. Aristia assumes he'll be mad, but seeing her hold a doll, Ruve is reminded of back when she was a toddler. It's noteworthy that Aristia does not remember said meeting, but he does. He strikes up a somewhat friendly conversation, which is immediately ruined as her father and Duke de Ras appear, with the later one mindlessly praising Aristia. Ruve gets mad and does his typical fake smile, which scares Aristia. She takes this as a reason to train even more. Promptly, the imperial household intervenes by inviting Aristia to join an opera with the emperor and the prince. Mind you, an opera depicting grown adults acting out the future of those children in front of them. Unfortunately, a chandelier falls and crushes the actors just before they link hands, as if to spell doom for the empire's future. Just at that time, a riot starts, forcing Aristia's father to leave for some time. As she visits the Verita mansion to prepare for the goodbye banquet, she catches Alandis in an unfitting moment that implies that he might have a much darker side than he lets her see. Aristia forgets about this immediately though, as he confesses that he has to leave the capital as well. It seems that the emperor has pulled some strings to get a competitor away from his son's fiancée. He's the only person who really thinks about any of this, I swear. Alandis still shoots his shot, and so Aristia has to say goodbye to the two most important people in her life for quite some time. Which is the perfect timing because she has to meet the second male lead candidate now. Karsane runs into her as she inspects weapons in a shop and immediately offers to help her pick out a fitting sword. He doesn't quite put on a very noble persona, but he is charming from the get-go. Before Aristia can introduce herself though, someone interrupts. Aristia still decides to go visit Karsane, hoping he could train with her. There she meets someone and Karsane, who immediately switches up as soon as he finds out who she is and yells at her. Due to his mother's involvement, he is forced to train with Aristia anyway, but quickly accuses her of only wanting to be a knight as a whim. Aristia leaves with the goal of proving him wrong and decides to work on her stamina first. She starts obsessing over her training to the point where she hurts herself. Luckily, Karsane interrupts and tells her to take a break. Like any good female lead, Aristia finds the perfect moment to feint and have him catch her. Aristia wakes up in her bed later, but is still certain that this is the right path. She proudly declares that she will become a knight and take over her family instead of becoming empress. This finally makes Karsane realize that she is serious and won't just stop after marrying, and he agrees to help her. As if fate wants to make fun of Aristia, she is promptly called to the palace again so that the emperor can give her some royal guards. But of course, that's just an excuse to have her meet Ruve again. The emperor, despite seeing that Aristia is very sick, orders her to have tea with her son. Ruve is allowed one sensible action this chapter, and upon noticing that Aristia is ill, he calls a carriage and brings her home. The bare minimum is in hell. This immediately makes Aristia wonder if he was worried about her after all, which brings her joy, and then she catches herself. But this is the moment where we get the final confirmation that really, everything Aristia said before is utter bullshit, because Ruve does the traditional male lead pining here. Even though we now know that it's useless, Aristia gets a letter from Alendis and Karsane visits again. We get this super cute scene where Karsane hates the tea Aristia made and forces himself to drink it anyway because he doesn't want to upset her. She even gives him sugar cubes after. But none of that matters because we know what will happen anyway. Meanwhile, Ruve handles political issues no 14-year-old should think about because an envoy from the Northern Lisa Kingdom has arrived with many gifts. Two of the men from that envoy take it upon themselves to tell him that his fiancée is unfitting because she's too young, and that he should take in one of their princesses as the queen. The 14-year-old shuts this down with relative ease and worries about Aristia's health instead. Aristia is jump-scared by Alendis' return. Karsane gets jealous as soon as he sees them together. Alendis takes the time to ask for permission to call Aristia by her nickname Tia, which is usually reserved for lovers or family. She agrees, but thinks about Ruve instead. Very supple. Karsane argues with Alendis and points out that Alendis might have a darker side he hides from Tia. Alendis seems to be obsessed, being able to recount the exact number of hours he spent with Aristia. Aristia remains ignorant of this though. She also ignores that Karsane and Alendis hate each other, despite being told that they had gotten into a physical alteration. Very naive for an empress, I would say. But just then, Aristia gets an invitation to attend a royal ball for the crown prince's coming of age as his fiancée. Needless to say, she is displeased and Alendis notices. He swears that he will believe her and asks her to confide in him, and surprisingly, Aristia does. She talks about her first life before death, about Jiun, about her miscarriage, about Ruve, about her execution. And Alendis. You must have had a very bad dream. Pay it no mind. It's just a dream. Doesn't believe her. This is the one thing he does that immediately burns Aristia's trust in him. No apologies make up for it. Aristia doesn't take it well. As she attends the ball, Ruve notices that she acts very off, is very cold and distant. She meets Alendis' gaze for a second but immediately turns away. Ruvelis is now officially crowned an adult, signifying a ticking clock as Aristia's time is running out. She takes a break on the balcony, only for Alendis to corner her. She still isn't persuaded. Ruve takes notice, but chooses not to intervene. He merely makes Aristia dance with him. She does extremely well until she, of course, trips so that we can get this. And finally, Ruve asks a question that has plagued him for quite some time. Why are you so scared of me? She, of course, can't reply. Ruve assumes that she is scared he'll view her as a political enemy and suggests she become queen instead of empress. Aristia immediately sees her past resurface, but before she can break down, her father interrupts the ball with his arrival. As Aristia runs to greet him, Marcus Monique takes the opportunity to announce that he intends to make Aristia his family's heir. Ruve, finally remembering that oracle he usually ignores, points out that Aristia is his fated partner and refutes that idea for now, hoping to discuss later. Here, Ruve also brings up something called a vow for the first time, assuming that Marcus Monique will use it to avoid having Aristia be empress. Unfortunately, we don't get to hear what it is just yet. Instead, Aristia laments being tired and her father suggests a vacation at their remote estate. And this is where season 1 ends. Aristia is still on vacation, while she keeps training her sword skills. Meanwhile, Alendis is moping because Aristia is mad at him, and his mental health is seemingly plummeting because of it. He hands Karsane a letter and asks him to relay it to Aristia. Karsane agrees on a truce, worrying about how close Ruve was to Aristia during his coming-of-age ball. Karsane's father then sends him to visit Aristia. Meanwhile, the capital speculates whether Aristia's engagement will be called off because her father publicly announced that she would become the next heir of her house. We are also reminded that the Lisa kingdom is still trying to claim the position of the queen. Aristia is surprised as Karsane appears, only to find out that her father called him here because he needs to return to the capital. Aristia chooses to stay to distance herself from the crown and Alendis. Karsane is eager to train her in sword fighting again, but he also hands over Alendis' letter. Alandis offers a heartfelt apology, which seems to work on Aristia. Maybe it shouldn't, because we see that Alandis is still more than unstable. The story is also quick to remind us that those two guys don't matter at all, because we switch back to Ruve, who is racking his brain about why Aristia suddenly doesn't want to marry him. He is immediately swarmed by random noble ladies shooting their shot at him. In his frustration, Ruve makes a glorious decision to chase Aristia to her home estate. I mean, visit the borders and stop at the Monique estate in the middle. Aristia isn't happy, but she welcomes Ruve anyway. He quickly realizes how close she is to Karsane and reminds him of his place with a few vague words. He's good at scaring people, I'll give him that. Ruve also pushes Aristia into a corner and makes her tell him when she will return to the capital. Aristia is uncomfortable when he repeatedly calls her his fiancée, but she also blushes. And as Ruve gets them a moment alone, he calls her out for fearing him, but also offering him all his favorite dishes and favorite wine, when he never even told her about his preferences. Aristia tries to avoid him again, only for Ruve to remind her that she is his fated partner. As he keeps accusing her of throwing away her honorable position as the Empress and prioritizing her own house, Aristia sees herself from the first timeline in him, and breaks down. Aristia does her favorite thing and faints, leaving Ruve to catch her in a scene resembling something from the first timeline. He calls the royal doctor. As Aristia wakes up again, she is stunned into a paralyzed silence. Ruve shows genuine concern, even going as far as to refuse when his aide reminds him that he has to attend other events. This is when he finds Alandis' letter, the one detailing everything Aristia told Alandis about her first life. A great opportunity for our male lead, right? He finally has a chance to understand why Aristia hates him so much. What does Ruve do with this super important information? I wonder. Well, the first thing he does is go spar with Karsane for some reason. Marcus Monique finally reaches the estate in the meantime, and finds Aristia in her vegetative state. He then yells at her for being too coddled and too weak to take over her family like this, which somehow is enough to wake Aristia up. We then get the scene where Ruve worries about Aristia but assumes she'll get better if he isn't there. He puts back her letter and then leaves. Aristia, despite waking up a moment ago, is still trapped in her own mind, revisiting old scenes from her new and old life. All she really seems to care about is that Ruve got all worried when she fainted though, but still, she absolutely wants to distance herself from him. And she finally wakes up. Upon reading Alandis' letter and telling herself that she isn't alone this time, she regains her strength, because that's how trauma works. And so, Aristia decides that she wants to return to the capital. On the way home, Karsane is still upset about what Ruve told him and is weirdly avoidant towards Aristia because of it. He only softens up a bit when their carriage stops in the flower field and we get the most romantic scene of this entire manhwa. But Karsane doesn't get to confess his feelings and they move on quickly. Having returned to the capital, Aristia finally tells her father about her first life. In contrast to Alandis, he believes her immediately, even as she describes it as some sort of bad dream. Meanwhile, Ruve is freaking out about that letter he found, being half insulted that Aristia would think that badly about him when he never did anything to her, and being half terrified of what bad dream she might be talking about. Then we get another flashback about how he met Aristia as a child. He does the whole male lead spiel about how no one aside from the female lead, and her mother, gave him any attention as a child. At the same time, Aristia is visited by Duke Deras, who offers to have her work as a squire in his squadron, something all knights do during their training. So she gets a cute new outfit and starts working with some new co-workers, including... I'd introduce them, but they really don't matter. What matters is that Alandis is visited by some sketchy guy in a black coat and tries to gain aura by burning the letter handed to him. It seems the pro-nobility faction, the faction opposing the imperial family, has attempted to contact him. Alandis is a bit confused by this, but worries about Aristia not responding to him more than anything else. When his mother comes to check on him, he snaps at her and tells her to focus on his brother instead, like always. He also starts hallucinating here. We are immediately told that Aristia might be ignoring him because her father is discarding Alennis' letters into some random drawer. He even responds to Alennis and tells him to stay away from Aristia. Alennis takes it well, so well that he decides to help the pro-nobility faction in hopes of breaking off Aristia's engagement. Note: it seems very, very obvious that this is a horrible idea. For some reason, Alennis, despite being described as also intelligent, still chooses to do it. We'll see how that goes. Aristia notices that her mate is hiding letters from her by now. For once, she acts like a good friend and visits House de Verita, where she meets Alennis' mother, who also doesn't matter. But as Aristia knocks on Alennis' door, he merely snaps at her. When she steps in, he loudly announces that she must be a hallucination until she calls out to him. Alennis, again, takes it in stride. Aristia still drinks some tea with him. She does, however, note that Alennis' desk carried a letter that seemed out of place. She doesn't do anything about it though, because why would she? We just get to see her father separate her and Alennis putting on that evil face again. Aristia confronts her father about keeping Alennis away from her, which forces him to remind her that as the prince's fiancée, she can't just go meet other men. For some reason, our politically capable empress hasn't thought of this. Aristia immediately forgets that she was mad at her father because of this. Ruve finally returns to the capital as well, and after working a lot, he decides he has to work yet again, showing that he really has no other hobbies. Aristia sees him in the passing, immediately drops everything she was holding, and then subtly blushes. Because she isn't interested in this guy, right? That night, Aristia overhears her father mumble something about her dead mother. Apparently, most of her memories have been suppressed because of some traumatizing event, forcing him to attend the memorial on his own. He also drops a comment about some curse running in the blood of their family. And finally, we get context on what that is, because Marcus Monique is talking about the blood vow Ruve previously brought up. It seems to be a special link between the imperial family and House Monique. But the context immediately stops, because why give us information directly if you can spoon-feed it? Aristia still can't remember much about her mother's death, but as the dreaded anniversary arrives, she visits the palace garden and the big tree there to clear her mind. Guess who she meets there? For once, they have a somewhat productive conversation. At least Ruve tries and backtracks as soon as Aristia tenses up. But finally, Aristia finds out that Ruve did know her mother all those years ago. She doesn't ask questions though. At least they take a walk together and stare at this conveniently romantic plot tree together too. Ruve swoons a bit, but Aristia remains unaware. Back at home, Aristia finally asks about her mother, and finds out that Ruve was present when Jeremiah died. But again, the story doesn't give us more than breadcrumbs and jumps into the future a little. Alennis has become the youngest administration officer of the Empire, proving his status as a genius. Meanwhile, Karstein has also continued to hone his sword-fighting skills, and is happy to hear that Aristia does the same. He comes to visit to brag about becoming an official knight soon. Without a warning, Alennis also joins. He then has to remind our clueless Aristia that holding Karstein's hand in public might draw gossip and the noble's ire. While his fiancée is messing around with his biggest supporters, Ruve is sick. This is not important to the story. The author just lets us know that this quote-unquote poor boy is coughing and neglecting himself while thinking about Aristia. Typical male lead stuff. A few days later, Aristia is invited for an audience in the palace. Because the emperor has finally had enough of his son's fiancée constantly seeing other guys, he points out that this might tear apart the entire faction. Ending the engagement would also open up House Monique to attacks from their enemies though, so a decision has to be made. I am sure they'll do that soon. Just before Ruve can give his response, a commotion interrupts. Specifically, a fire that might burn our beloved plot tree. Aristia suddenly remembers Ruve admiring it and suddenly becomes very attached to that tree, enough for her to simply run over despite the chaos. She also loses that panic in a split second and orders the servants around to have them put out the fire with a spontaneous burst of capability. She does catch on fire for a split second too, but simply cuts that part of her dress off with a random knight's sword. Of course, everyone now stares at Aristia and tells her how great she is, including the Emperor. This immediately makes him change his mind and decide that he absolutely wants to keep Aristia as his daughter-in-law, at least until a coming-of-age ceremony. Ruve swoons a bit again too. Moving on. Attending a tea party at House de Verita, Aristia meets her new, let's call them friends, specifically Ilya, a high-ranking noble lady, and a couple other people who I won't name. What matters is that Aristia is completely unaware of any rumors about her and Elendis/Karsane. I'm sorry for saying it like that, but this makes her seem very stupid. During the New Year's Day, the Emperor points out that he too is aware of the rumors circulating in the capital, but blames the aristocratic faction, so he asks Aristia to be careful. We also get to meet the leader of the pro-nobility/aristocratic faction now, Duke Zena, a noble who lost most of his power years ago but is still well regarded. For what reason, we do not know because he seems to be an asshole. He immediately makes his disdain of Aristia and her father clear, accusing them of disrespect in his second speech bubble, and after that, he claims that Aristia has vulgar blood. However, her father doesn't explain the reason to her. But aside from their enemies, Aristia's allies also mock her for the vague rumors about her indecent relationships. She overhears the ladies of the Imperial faction implying that Ilya, who, to her credit, at least shuts down the insults, should be Empress instead. Aristia finally remembers that she has to navigate the political landscape of this country if she wants to be a noble, and requests information about all noble households. Once she finishes learning, she burns the book for some reason. I don't know why she does that. I really don't. But during the next party, she applies her suddenly gained self-control and awareness. She makes some friends who don't do much either. I'm starting to see a pattern. She intends to use those lower-ranking women to improve her social standing while letting them benefit from her power. Despite this being a fairly tame way of doing politics, she, for some reason, has a moral issue with this. She didn't even do anything yet and she's already sad? My god. Aristia does start to move though and holds a banquet, specifically excluding the women who mocked her before. During the banquet, all Aristia gets is unfiltered praise for designing a Korean hair accessory, despite being from a European-inspired mix-and-match world. Meanwhile, Duke de Ras and Duke de Verita try to poke Ruve to find out what he thinks about Aristia doing political stuff. In contrast to before, Ruve is not mad, but is just worried about Aristia overworking herself. Karsane finally has his knighting ceremony too, but the Emperor intervenes and makes sure Aristia can't attend by making her sword an entire room of old books. During the ceremony, Ruve can only think about Aristia, of course. He storms off in the middle of it to go fetch Aristia so that she can join the ceremony after all, which is nice. But it also leads to a less selfless situation where Ruve can lead Aristia into the ballroom and hold their hand in front of everyone. Clever. Ruve also uses the moment to call out both Karsane and Elendis, thanking them for being Aristia's friends, therefore reminding them of their boundaries, but also fighting against the rumors about his fiancée's indecency. Duke Zena and his faction of Shadowmen now decide that Aristia is a threat and has to be eliminated and replaced with a woman from their faction. Aristia, unaware of that, runs into Ruve's aide, who pushes her to visit Ruve's study and hand over some tea. Aristia agrees for some unknown reason. She is unlucky though, as Ruve is sleeping when she arrives. Like a normal person, she stands there and just stares at him for a bit and then snoops around his room. Remember? Because she has absolutely no interest in this guy. Aristia finds a noble dictionary from 20 years ago, finally letting her find out that her mother's birth name was Jeremiah de Sonia, and that she came from a baron's house, whose title was withdrawn after her marriage, which would absolutely make Aristia a full-blooded noble, despite Duke Zena implying otherwise. At that point, Ruve naturally interrupts her. Aristia immediately offers this guy, whom she absolutely hates as we recall, help with his documents. He thanks her but rejects for today, implying that she might be able to help him later. Aristia returns home and asks some questions about her mother, where she finds out that her father was originally engaged to Ruve's aunt, but broke off that engagement to marry her mother. Thank goodness. Imagine that other witch was your mother, I'd kill. We get the subplot about Aristia creating her own jewelry line because every manhwa needs capitalism for some reason. I don't care for it at all in this story though. It goes on for 2.5 chapters and just ends in more Aristia glazing. At least we get this panel of Alendis being cute. Cute while he is actively upset that Aristia is developing into a more confident person. Foundation Day arrives. The most important celebration for the Empire, and before you get your hopes up, the story introduces unnecessary characters and a subplot that goes nowhere first, because now a bunch of princesses come to vie for Ruve's attention and the position of the Empress, including Mean Princess Moira the Yid of the Yid Kingdom, who immediately tries to humiliate Aristia and throws herself at Ruve like a rabid squirrel. Ruve is less interested and just shuts her down. She doesn't let that deter her though, announcing her as a rival. We also get Nice Princess, Princea de Rua of the Rua Kingdom, who has a romance with Karsen's other brother. There are also 3 more princesses, but you get the gist, they don't matter. The only one who really matters is the one who keeps harassing Ruve, because it gives Ruve an excuse to ask Aristia to make tea for him to calm him down. Aristia sticks to her plan of keeping her distance by making tea for him. At least he immediately chokes. And while Alendis decides to work with the aristocratic faction, for some reason, Season 2 ends. Oh boy. We sure have a lot of open-ended story pieces and a dozen characters left. I wonder how Season 3 handles this. Foundation Day finally arrives. Aristia specifically wears light clothes with the thought of matching Ruve's typical attire, only for him to have remembered her preference for darker clothes. They have a nice dance anyway. The princesses immediately ruin this, and Moira challenges Aristia to a duel. Moira demands to be gifted the shoes Ruve prepared for Aristia if she wins, which is pitiful. Another woman's gift, really. Have some standards, girl. Ruve accepts this condition suspiciously easily. As Aristia walks away, she overhears Luxena speaking with a spy from the Imperial faction. This happens to be Alendis, but unfortunately Aristia doesn't get to see him and has to withdraw. Alendis follows her and immediately tries to coax her into leaving with him, but Aristia doesn't take it seriously at all. The very next day, Aristia has a duel with Princess Moira. Aristia does quite well, but then loses on purpose, out of concern for their relations with Moira's kingdom. Ruve is a bit too happy about this result and sends Moira her new shoes instantly. He even dances with her during the ball, which Aristia, who isn't worried at all, takes as well as you'd expect. Until Moira's shoe breaks. Of course, it didn't fit her. It was made for someone else anyway. Ruve happily offers her a break as she gets terribly embarrassed. He even proudly tells Aristia that he plotted the entire thing by showing Moira that gift on purpose. That petty bastard finally did something enjoyable. Aristia is a bit flattered, but immediately ruins the fun by reminding Ruve that she doesn't really want to be his fiancé. Ruve is clearly hurt and walks off. Meanwhile, Aristia unwillingly admits that she was happy he did something to defend her. She tries to smooth over the argument with the princess and then visits the garden where, oh surprise, Ruve is sleeping. He asks Aristia to sit with him for a while. Then he even gets her a ladder so that she can look at the flower blossoms. Aristia of course falls off said ladder so Ruve can also catch her. All in all, a good scene for him. Aristia meets Karsen and Alendis again, with the later one inviting her to a festival. And during a scene where he brushes her hair, she finally realizes that Alendis has romantic feelings for her, even if he asks her to ignore it for now. Aristia finally seems to understand the issue. Immediately after, Ruve visits again. During a walk, they spot one of the princesses strolling around with her god, whom she seems to be in love with and has a baby with. Oh. Well, Aristia thinks Ruve will be mad for some reason, but he obviously isn't because he only cares about shielding his fiancée from the rain. On the final day of the founding celebrations, Aristia dresses up with a dress and shoes gifted by Ruve. Ilya visits to reassure our female lead that she will support her after all. Before the ball, the Emperor asks which princess Aristia would favor to become Ruve's fiancée. She, despite Ruve's obvious unease, suggests Princea. In return, the Emperor gives her a tiara to signal Aristia's connection to the royal family. Duke Xena and Princess Moira do not like this at all, and promptly a fight begins. Ruve breaks it up and uses that moment to clarify that he will send all 5 princesses home. Aristia is surprised, because the author likes to write her as hella dense, I guess. But the Emperor uses this chance to call out Yuzena's collaboration with Princess Moira and wants the aristocrats to hold back. And finally, Ruve gets a moment with Aristia alone and asks her to reconsider, given that he really wants to marry her. Aristia doesn't seem to mind this version of him, but she keeps remembering Ji-yeon and her threatening arrival. She gives no response, but Ruve asks her to see him for who he is now. Oh, and Princess Princia gets her happy ending, I guess. This only happens to make Aristia be jealous of her love, but you know, it happens. It's a very unfitting moment, but Karsain immediately flirts with Aristia after, only to play it off as a joke. Aristia now attends the festival with Elendis, who pulled out all the tricks in the book to woo Aristia. At the end he confesses. But despite previously blushing and enjoying his affection wholeheartedly, Aristia finally has to give him a response. He tries to stop her, but Aristia is sure. She cares for Elendis sincerely, but he is a friend to her, nothing more. Her first precious friend. And much to the reader's dismay, the man she loves is someone very different. Losing her best friend like this hurts Aristia as well. But Elendis is the one who loses his mind completely and hallucinates again. We get some background on why too, because it turns out that Elendis' father actually plotted to have Aristia be wed to his eldest son instead, even going as far as to purposefully praise her in front of Ruve to piss him off. Which is, to put it bluntly, absolutely fucking insane. This guy is willing to ruin their relationship with the royal family entirely, just to get his son the fiancé of the guy he is supposed to follow soon. Duke de Verita also seems to hate Elendis for being more intelligent than he is, and favors his older sick son instead, which led to Elendis feeling excluded. Like I said, insane. This is also what led to Elendis visiting Aristia all those years ago. He wanted to win her over before his brother could. Mind you, Aristia is still engaged to the crown prince, so this all seems like a very stupid idea that could potentially ruin their relationship to the next emperor over some ego games. Anyway, the story also finally admits that Elendis liked Aristia because of this, and because she, in his words, seemed like someone who hadn't been loved by many people and thought she might become obsessed with him, which announces that he is now going off to the deep end and certainly won't have a chance anymore. Aristia handles this breakup better and recovers after some time. Her father also supports her by wishing to signal her position as the house's heir more openly. He also tells her about how he met her mother and that he made that blood vow to the crown to be able to marry her. Essentially, the blood vow seems to be a magical vow that forces a member of House Monique to serve the crown with unending loyalty. If you were to break it, you would either die or experience pain big enough to make you wish for death. This is the fate he wishes to spare Aristia from. Meanwhile, the Emperor collapses, announcing his worsening health. Ruve assures everyone that his father will recover soon, but it doesn't look good. He calls for the high priest of the temple. At the same time, Aristia visits that princess who got into a relationship with her knight and happened to settle down in the empire by now. They are attacked by a group of hooded men who seem to come from the princess's home country. Aristia finally gets to show off her fighting skills. She holds her ground until the royal guards come to save them, giving an enemy a chance to attack her. At the worst moment, we cut back to Ruve, who meets High Priest Tertius, who... Nope. We cut back to Aristia for some reason. I don't know why we had to switch perspectives for 5 panels in the middle of this chapter, but we did. Karsin saves her and is injured in the process. They win the fight, but he faints. At least we stay on topic this time and see him get treated. He survives but lost his eyesight and is unlikely to recover it. This is actually an emotional scene where Karsin desperately tries to cheer Aristia up, but she is devastated. I'm sure the manhwa will honor that, right? All Aristia can do is leave for now, but just as she arrives home, Ruve arrives in a rush as well. This is also a great scene because Aristia finally allows herself to break down and cry, while Ruve genuinely consoles her and reminds her that it wasn't her fault. And then The story ruins all of the emotional stakes immediately by saying that Ruve sent the High Priest to heal Karsane, and this introduces one of the worst plot devices of his damn manhwa because Tertius puts his grabby fingers onto Karsane's face for 2 seconds and instantly solves the entire issue. I hate that. Either actually make Karsane carry some long-term consequences, or don't pull this at all. Like, I'm happy that the best character of the series wasn't blinded, but doesn't this feel a little cheap? A single scene later, Karsane is just fine again and jokes around like nothing happened. He isn't even especially traumatized because he almost lost his eyesight and his entire life's goal in a single day. The only point of this incident was to make Aristia dive into Ruve's arms and have her thank him for sending that convenient plot device over. At least we find out that Ruve actually made the royal guards follow Aristia because he assumed that she would be attacked. And he was right, since the attack was apparently aimed at Aristia after all. Alandis gets upset hearing about this, but also admits that he kind of conspired with the person who might have caused all of this. Our genius now finally realizes that the people who hate the imperial family also hate Aristia and might want her gone. He has a mental breakdown over this extremely obvious fact. So, Alandis confesses to the Emperor and is sent away as punishment, effectively writing him out of the story at chapter 108. Which is a shame, but it's also desperately necessary because we have far too many characters to deal with already. At least Alandis gets to say a heartfelt goodbye and leaves. Losing their puppet made the aristocratic faction, against which Alandis by the way could have continued to work, but didn't for some reason, decide that they have to control Ruve instead and they keep plotting. Meanwhile, Aristia arrives in the palace garden just in time to see the Emperor yell at Ruve, because Ruve was concerned about his father's health. Ruve catches her eavesdropping and we get them acting all cute again. And Aristia now has a cat for some reason. But it's only used to give her an excuse to spend time with Ruve, really, because it literally disappears after this scene and is never mentioned again. Out of concern for his father's health, Ruve sends him away to a palace outside the capital and asks Aristia to accompany the Emperor. This gives them an opportunity to chat. Here we find out just how dumb this stupid man is, because he admits to knowingly neglecting Ruve emotionally because an Emperor has to be strong. I mean, he's not wrong, but politically Ruve is doing quite well for his age, and most people around him want to kill him, or in the very least manipulate him into doing their bidding. I feel like his father could at least treat him with respect, but apparently he thinks kindly of his son but simply yells at him whenever he can, so that Ruve doesn't find out. What? This child lost his mother early, so you'd think that the father should step in. But no. Anyway, Aristia doesn't call out that asshat on being a deadbeat father, but she does pity Ruve. And just as she starts to believe that things might be looking up, an envoy appears. A girl with black hair appeared at the palace's lake. Ji-un is here, 1 year before she should have appeared. And the temple and the aristocratic faction think that she's the girl of the prophecy. Of course, Aristia has to return to the capital now and defend herself. Aristia, who doesn't care about Ruve at all that way, gets terribly nauseous at the thought of him spending time with Ji-un. Ruve still seems to prioritize her, but Aristia lies to herself and tries to avoid him. But it gets worse. Aristia overhears how Vita, the traitorous god, grants Ji-un a divine name. It seems like Vita really likes to mess with her, because now the two are on equal footing. And Aristia desperately needs help now, because the aristocratic faction pushes for a trial, arguing that Ji-un is the correct child of prophecy and must therefore become empress. Aristia has to defend her own title by bringing up her divine name, while Ji-un is weirdly quiet. Ruve has the high priest appear, who explains that the temple favors Ji-un. Tertius himself believes that both are children of the prophecy though, with Aristia being able to hear Vita's voice and Ji-un having divine power. And just when we think that Aristia might be able to catch a break... Long time no see, Tia. Did you enjoy your time without me? Ji-un also went back in time. If Aristia were to give up on her engagement now, she would actually have the perfect excuse. She could simply relinquish her seat to Ji-un. She tells herself that this is an option when really she hasn't wanted that in a while. She decides to take over her house anyway. Of course, without informing Ruve of anything, because why would she communicate with her fiancé? Finally, Duke Xena points out that Aristia has the blood of a peasant and therefore isn't worthy of being empress. Allegedly, his younger sister had a child with a commoner, the child turning out to be Jeremiah, Aristia's mother. The previous records Aristia found were most likely fake. Just as the scandal flares up, Jeong speaks and decides to be adopted by Duke Xena, openly supporting the aristocratic faction. This now forces Aristia to fight for her faction's survival. At least it should. She still doesn't seem to feel invested and runs off at the slightest pushback though. A composed empress, I tell you. As she cries at the river, Ruve finds her, but she avoids him again. But he made his decision. The very next day, Ruve announces that he doesn't want Jeong to be his queen. He brings up some excuse by pointing out Jeong's inexperience, but really, he doesn't want to marry anyone but Aristia. He manages to delay the decision for another year, until Aristia's coming of age. Aristia does absolutely nothing still. She only makes Ruve console her and cries when he swears that he will let her dissolve the engagement if she still asks for it a year later. Ruve also tells her how he met her mother. Apparently he tried to steal Scepter and she chewed him out for it. After that they got along quite well. He also reassures Aristia and tells her that he doesn't care even if her mother was a commoner. And we get a small insight into Ruve's mind and learn that he is actually an illegitimate child, not the previous empress's son. It explains some of his animosity towards Aristia, but not a lot. Aristia takes some political steps to spy on the imperial faction in Jeong. She's still too foolish to realize that Karsten is flirting with her though. Aristia then mopes around in the bathtub and thinks about Ruve. A week later, both Aristia and Jeong are summoned to the palace. Jeong is praised for suggesting a couple ideas. After that she clings to Ruve, who is just trying to follow Aristia though. Aristia avoids him for some reason. Really? She already knows her faction is ruined if Jeong becomes empress now, but she doesn't seem to think about it much at all. The high priest interrupts and warns Aristia about some upcoming unpleasant news. He also expresses his support. Aristia immediately gets new duties though. The Family Day celebrations return and both her and Jeong are required to each budget and prepare events of one day. Ruve's aunt visits Aristia and offers her support while also explaining how rude Jeong has been to the servants of the palace. Aristia suddenly gets dizzy again, just as the Duchess notes that the tea tastes a bit off today. It gets so bad that she almost collapses as she presents her budget to the Emperor. Beta takes this opportunity to give her a new prophecy, announcing the birth of a new high priest. Jeong didn't hear it, granting Aristia a slight advantage. I'm going to note that this is where the story, in my eyes, becomes rushed. It's visible in the art, which has been immaculate since the beginning, but kind of gets weird for 2 or 3 chapters. The writing takes a much bigger blow though and doesn't recover at all. I'm going to touch on that after we finish, but just note that it's happening here during the last 25 chapters. I'll try to summarize the remaining story as well as I can first, because hold on tight, we have a lot to go through. Aristia attends the second day of the founding celebrations with Karsten. This is Aristia's event, which is interrupted by numerous noble ladies with petty tricks. Jeong actually steps forward and calls out some of the ladies for being rude, but lets Duke Xena admonish Aristia and gives her a dirty grin after. Peace off. Aristia is getting sicker now, but she still stays. Karsten mocks Jeong for having lost her partner for today, given that Ruve is coincidentally busy. After a short argument, Karsten, best boy, simply drags Jeong off and forces her to dance with him, giving Aristia a moment alone. Ruve is certainly not too busy to send Aristia a calming tea though. During the next day, Aristia is even sicker. Ruve insists on calling a doctor, but Aristia refuses until they at least have their public dance. This goes well until she faints. But she is lucky to have done so, because the doctor finds out that she has been poisoned for quite some time. Ruve comes to visit, apologizing for his inability to protect her, but only the high priest can heal her after she was in a coma for 3 months? Oh my god. Anyway, the poison apparently causes nausea, difficulty breathing, and makes you emotionally unstable. Huh. The poison can not only do that, can also cause infertility in women and cause them to miscarry a child, meaning that Aristia was affected by this poison in her first life and that this made her lose her child. Luckily, it was found earlier this time because a different poison was administered during the ball. Remember the tea Ruve allegedly sent? Yeah, that wasn't from him. But still, it's unknown if Aristia will ever be able to have children again. And during the past 3 months, the Emperor has become very sick. He voices his last wish, asking Aristia to stay by Ruve's side, even if only as a friend. he's not going to last for much longer. Ruve has to deal with the political mess and the assassination attempt on his fiancée, but he can't do much for now. Duke Zena asks for an audience, is rejected, and we meet this guy. Lord? Milieu? Ah?
Milieu.
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 Milieu. A panel later, the Emperor dies. Ruve hears about it for the first time, instantly becomes Emperor himself, and is given no time to grieve at all because the people already cheer on him. He isn't doing well during the funeral. Aristia isn't either, which is funny because she keeps saying that she cared for the Emperor so much, but she never really visited him on her own volition. Aristia finally shows some concern for the guy she will marry, despite not acknowledging it yet, and goes to console him. Luckily, because Jeong tried to do so too, but Aristia was first. And Aristia finally gets to tell him that his father actually cared, which Ruve doesn't seem to believe. Why would he? His father only ever ordered him around like a pawn. Father of the year, I tell you. Ruve asks Aristia to stay with him after, which she does. They sit at our beloved plot tree, where Aristia reassures him regarding his father's opinion of him. Ruve confesses that he not only hated Aristia until a while ago, but also that he was born from a maid working in the palace. Therefore, the Empress, his official mother, hated and neglected him. The Emperor, whose fault this was, didn't do anything about that and also never let Ruve see his real mother. Father of the year. Ruve also brings up an assassination attempt where Jeremiah ended up protecting Aristia with her own life, while his mother basically left him to fend for himself. To Ruve, who saw Jeremiah as some sort of mother figure, this was quite painful, even if he acknowledges that it was only logical. Because of that, Ruve, who barely received any affection, became incredibly jealous of Aristia. And finally, in a moment of softness, Ruve reaches out, and Aristia accepts. Our main couple has finally found together, with 20 chapters left of the story. It was a perfect progression, with just enough time to develop them further. Or so you would think. Because during another trial, the aristocrats call Aristia unfitting to be empress. Ruve defends her, but someone announces that Aristia is infertile, something that hasn't been proven, mind you. Aristia rebukes by saying that she has no intention of becoming empress. Wait, what? Just how confused does Ruve have to be here? I mean, they cuddled the entire evening, and then the next morning, Aristia says this out loud. All while Ruve is in a very troubling political situation. Frankly, Ruve takes this better than I would have. He's shocked and upset, but he keeps his grief to himself and says that he will let Aristia break off the engagement, a chapter after we just got to see them together. Aristia suddenly says that she wants nothing to do with politics, which she can't do as the heir of House Monique. I don't understand why she'd think that Jeong being empress would help her or her faction, but oh well. I guess she kinda feels bad about it, but you know, it doesn't make her change her mind. Ruve is now being crowned emperor. Aristia mopes around because he isn't looking at her though. I swear this girl. She also has the nerve to get jealous seeing Jeong standing next to Ruve as if she didn't cause this. Aristia at least makes herself a little useful and investigates the aristocrats and suspects the temple smuggled the poison used on her. She goes to tell Ruve, who accepts her hint, but treats her cold and distantly, because she tried to break off this engagement publicly. Aristia suddenly realizes she doesn't like this, but still won't talk to him. The high priest blesses Aristia again, but she meets Jeong on the way out. Jeong rightfully calls her out on her hot and cold act with Ruve and tells Aristia that she was all jealous during the coronation, which Aristia allegedly didn't notice until Jeong points it out. A grown woman, everyone. Jeong also implies that things maybe didn't go too well for her during that first timeline, but she doesn't tell Aristia more. She merely confirms that they are enemies, one way or the other, and that she came back to win. Meanwhile, Aristia finally contacts Duke de Verita and Duke de Ras to coordinate their forces. She also receives a coming-of-age gift from Ruve, specifically a music box depicting her with the Empress's crown. Another attempt for him to reach out. Another attempt she ignores. Ruve also attends her coming-of-age ball, and Aristia invites him to dance, but tells herself it doesn't matter anyway. People make fun of her after the ball, and Karsane has to defend her, because Aristia suddenly lost all of her confidence. The next day, there's a random hunting festival, and a bear attacks Aristia. Okay. She meets Ruve, and doesn't tell him about the bear. but lets him bring her home. He mentions that our plot tree is about to bloom, which excites Aristia more than any other thing this entire manhwa. Ruve offers to invite her once the tree does bloom. He also uses the chance to flirt with her. As you can see, Aristia is totally unaffected. Aristia keeps investigating and realizes that this guy, Manhwa, is acting weird. She prepares some more scheming though, hoping to bankrupt Deus. This is when Jeong approaches her, asking what the fuck she's doing if she claims she's not interested in politics, which is valid. She also accuses Aristia of stealing money though, when the temple actually did that. Aristia does some more conspiring and blackmails this guy, some relative of Deus. He only appears for half a chapter. Apparently, her meddling becomes so frustrating that some aristocrats push for Aristia to be empress, hoping to delay Aristia's investigations of their crimes and break up the imperial faction by making Jeong queen instead. This is when Jeong shows up again, complaining about Aristia telling her that she will withdraw from this fight for power, but continuing to meddle. She also calls her out for falling for Ruve, who hit her, executed her, and made her lose her child. Fair. She also points out that her own relationship with Ruve went south in the first timeline after Aristia's death, because apparently Ruve didn't do well without Aristia's support and her faction. Surprise, surprise. Aristia doesn't really defend Ruve, luckily. She does clarify that she slept with him freely though, which is half true, I guess. And she also says something interesting, that she only grieved after losing her child because she feared losing Ruve's attention, because she was so obsessed with him. For once, the author actually allows our female lead to have less than perfect traits, to be a little messed up. We also get another very interesting argument. Jeong argues that Ruve is the same man, and that Aristia should want revenge. Aristia says that both she and Ruve are different, and Aristia finally asks herself why she keeps rejecting Ruve at all, when she claims that she trusts him. You might think that this would finally make her decide on what to do. It doesn't. During Aristia's knighting ceremony, she vows her loyalty to Ruve as the emperor. Not only that, she wishes to do a blood vow to him, to prove that House Monique is going to support him even if she isn't his empress. And for the first time, Ruve does what she's been doing this entire time and just refuses her. He spins around and runs, ruining her entire plan. Aristia storms after him, at which point Ruve confesses his love and kisses her. Aristia pushes him away. You know, I'm gonna be honest here. Aristia has every right in the world to reject this guy, and Ruve is pushing it. But the problem is that we know how this ends. Aristia does all this only to end up with Ruve anyway, which leads to us spending more than 30 chapters flip-flopping between seeing them get closer and Aristia suddenly changing her mind. The first time it was impactful, now it's getting quite annoying, especially because we have only 12 chapters left. And fixing this relationship in such a short time is, frankly, impossible. But ignore my frustrations. Aristia returns home and finds the letters Ruve sent her when she was in a coma. She still says she won't cave. Fate immediately tests her conviction as she goes to help Ruve for some paperwork and is disappointed he won't try to flirt with her again. She also gets unwell when Jeong asks for an audience, but luckily Ruve lets Aristia stay. Jeong, who looks gorgeous in that dress by the way, brought a personal gift. Ruve just sends her away early though, much to her dismay. But then, Ruve suddenly collapses. The high priest heals him, but he still isn't doing well. The high priest asks him if he experienced mood swings, because apparently he was poisoned with the very same poison as Aristia, which means the author wrote in an excuse for how horrible Ruve was in the first timeline, because he was simply drugged. Oh boy. Aristia gets home and instantly has a nightmare, and as she sees Ruve spit out blood and die, she prays to God, offering to give back her second life just to save him, because she won't ever love this guy again. Before we focus on this mess again, we find out that Elendis' older brother died. We hear that Elendis visited but immediately left again, implying that he might return in the future, but we probably won't see him during the story anymore. Aristia keeps investigating the poisoning, and meets the high priest again, who introduces her to a new high priest. Yep, it's that baby. But more importantly, we find out that each high priest gets to make a single divine wish in their lifetime. They give up on their entire divine power due to it, but can reach almost any outcome. Don't worry, this plot device will be used wisely in the future. Meanwhile, we find out that Manhwa is probably responsible for the poisoning. This isn't as important as the fact that Princia is visiting though. She brings a newborn baby, which is basically just an excuse for Aristia to get insecure. She wonders if Ruve would like a child, if she would like a child, or whether she can even have one. She cries and like always, Ruve comes to console her. He even says that he loves her, even if she cannot have children. In response, Aristia runs away. Breathe in with me. It's almost over. Ruve does all the heavy lifting again and follows her so that they can go out together. He kisses Aristia again, and she finally kisses back. Do you think she finally? No. She went home and changed her mind again. Oh, how could the Emperor give up on having his own child? She cries, but keeps claiming she'll break the engagement off. Oh my god. No, seriously, Vita, can you end this misery? The Foundation celebrations come again, and Aristia has to plan everything along with Jiun. She goes on another date with Ruve too, I guess. And before we can take a step forward, Aristia hears that her engagement to Ruve hasn't been cancelled yet, which we knew because he never said he had done so. He's still hoping for Aristia to change her mind and is struggling really hard politically right now. Aristia should know this too, but for some reason she acts like it's a huge betrayal. She gets all mad and then happy? Are you sure she isn't still taking the poison? Ruve begs her to give him another chance, but she refuses. Aristia considers telling him about their first life, but doesn't. She tells Ruve to marry someone else instead. He looks heartbroken and leaves. And Aristia cries. Again. I hate this woman. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate. By the way, this is chapter 138 of 145. Aristia then proceeds to be upset when Jiun shows her divine powers next to Ruve and is cheered on by the nation. Nice going, kiddo. Anyway, the chaos resumes as the pregnant princess shows up. Apparently, someone stabbed her. Jiun tries to heal her, but her powers are suddenly not working. At least the princess survives and keeps her baby. Then this random doctor we've never seen before touches Aristia's wrist for a moment and says that, actually, her womb isn't dried up and that she will be able to have children. Ah. Why didn't someone read her wrist earlier? My bad. Aristia spins around and looks at Ruve and gets upset he isn't looking at her, because she broke up with him, remember? She cries about it after, but at that point I don't care anymore. During a banquet, Ruve finally announces that someone has been poisoning him. All nobles are under house arrest for some time and a big trial will be held. Some unimportant side characters are found guilty, but I'll spare you that. But Marcus Manhwa is also involved, but he has gone into hiding. Ruve then finally does what Aristia asks for and drafts the engagement cancellation. Finally! Aristia got what she worked for. I'm sure she'll be happy, right? Right? The high priest now tells Aristia that Ruve specifically made a deal with him so that Aristia could regularly receive her blessings and stay healthy. Aristia feels bad, and then... I'm gonna be honest, to me this manhwa absolutely loses the plot here, because suddenly we get events in non-chronological order, which makes everything even more confusing for no reason. I'm going to fix that for you so that it sounds less insane. It's still very insane, and this is all just happening in one chapter, okay? Aristia approaches Jiun to ask about her healing power not working during that last emergency. Jiun confesses that actually she didn't heal the princess on purpose. She tries to justify it, but Aristia is too mad to continue the conversation. The knights are sent on a mission to find Marcus Manhwa. Aristia joins them as they search through the commoners district, where they reach a dead end. A trap, to be exact. Just as Aristia is cornered, Karsen appears with Jiun. Their enemies immediately go after Jiun and Karsen gets injured protecting her. Not only that, other royal knights also get hurt protecting Aristia. Among the attackers we see Marcus Manhwa. What a shocker! Question mark. Aristia picks up her sword after thinking about Ruve and the others that might be hurt if she just gives up. Then she thinks about Ruve again and wonders if he'd be upset if she was found dead. That was all just one chapter. Let that sink in and prepare for the next one. Karsen almost dies, but Marcus Manhwa doesn't strike him. Instead, he kills an attacker. Ruve interrupts the entire fight and his guards arrest everyone. Karsen is still injured though, but don't worry. We already know this manhwa doesn't kill anyone important. Aristia begs Jiun to be useful for once and heal him. Jiun finally admits that her powers don't work on people though. The doctor quickly tells Aristia that Karsen will recover though. Aristia is relieved, only for Aristia to be stabbed by a random background character. I wish I was joking. We've never seen this guy before. He's just suddenly there. Ruve is by her side immediately, but the doctors can already tell it's too late, as he cries and swears to love her forever, to even set her free if she wants it. Her eyes close. Wouldn't that be a cool ending? Aristia actually dying or getting a third shot at life? But of course we don't get that. Aristia wakes up in a fancy room. Her father is overjoyed to see her and immediately discusses her relationship with Ruve. I guess. Well, we have only 2.5 chapters left, we kinda have to rush. Aristia gets up like nothing happened and instantly climbs on Ruve's lap. Go girl, I guess? She finally gave up on this ping pong game and made her choice. We learn that Duxena was trialed while Aristia was asleep, and that Jiun also testified along with Marcus Milieu. It seems that Jiun didn't only warn the palace about the attack, but also saved Aristia from... Wait, what? She saved Aristia? Yes. Jiun used her divine wish, gave up on all of her power to heal Aristia. So Aristia goes to visit her. Jiun finally confesses what happened in the first timeline, that Ruve was also poisoned back then and got sick and distant. When the political mood tipped, he had to leave the capital in an attempt to protect himself, Jiun, and their child. Though, to Jiun it felt like being abandoned. She was politically isolated and couldn't make allies quickly enough. She gave birth to a daughter and fled with her, but was caught and killed. Jiun went back in time to get revenge on Duxena, who had killed her. She also hated Ruve, but when she saw how desperately he pleaded for Aristia's life, she felt that he was different. She used her divine wish and gave up on her power to save Aristia. Aristia chooses to let Jiun live, faking her death and forcing her to leave the Empire. We don't get to dwell on Jiun's traumatic story though. Aristia finally gets closer to Ruve, hugging him and thanking him for changing her fate. He outright asks about the letter he found about their first life and wants her to tell him more, so that he can avoid hurting her again. She does, even if she calls it a nightmare. And they finally found each other in chapter 144 of 145. But the story hurt us one last time as Karsane has a last tea time with Aristia and finally bids us farewell. He loved Aristia for too long to be around her when she can't return those feelings. And even if you understand, it does hurt. Goodbye, Karsane. I mean, if you don't want him, I could. Aristia manages to make a deal with the crown and her father. She will become the empress and the next head of House Monique at the same time. This also means that she will need to have 2 children to inherit both families, but she doesn't worry about that yet. Her concern is the execution of those traitors who committed treason. The guillotine brings back unpleasant memories. Duxena yells at everyone once more and... Aristia speaks with the high priest one last time, thanking God for giving her a chance to choose her own path. Ruve proves his love by making a blood oath to her, signaling that he will spend every waking day with her until the very end, living through each morning and evening with her. Aristia returns the vow, meaning that they both die if they ever betray each other. Ooh! We get a glimpse of Alendis as a scholar, Karsane as a knight, and Jiun as she travels through the world. And then, the imperial couple's wedding, blessed by Vita. I'm sure you noticed that the manhwa sped up quite a bit near the ending here, and that the last bit feels quite rushed. It's obviously the greatest flaw of this work, leaving out many important scenes and failing to develop Aristia's relationship with Ruve satisfyingly. The artist was aware though. They specifically left a note after the final chapter, apologizing for not being able to do everything they wanted. Why did they end the manhwa so weirdly then? Well, unfortunately, Ina received a lot of hate once it became clear that Ruve would be endgame. I can't blame them for not wanting to take the brunt of that hatred for long, especially because they were simply illustrating a story they hadn't even written. Stuff like this is genuinely a bad look for the entire community. People have the right to be upset at developments they don't enjoy in a fictional story, but they can't harass real people over something that is purely fictional, whether it's the artist or the author. Ina apparently received death threats too, which is dumb, careless, and frankly insane. You kind of don't prove that you hate a fictional abuse of men by being abusive to a real person. That's not how this works. We unfortunately can't change the past anymore, but I still think it's a shame. This manhwa would only have taken a couple more chapters to get a better ending, and frankly, the art has been beautiful the entire way through. Most people can agree that it's certainly one of this manhwa's best qualities. I mean, look at how Ina managed to draw all the characters at different ages. This is something most people struggle with, and they hit it out of the park. It's really great to be able to watch everyone grow up with the seasons. I don't think our artist ever got enough compliments for that. So, knowing that background, I will try to avoid criticizing any flaws that can be blamed on this abrupt ending too harshly, given that the artist was essentially forced to either give up or do it this way. I want this discussion to be respectful because frankly, I've seen much more toxic pairings and worse writing. That being said, I have some gripes I want to sink my claws in. The most obvious, say, divisive decision in the story is the male lead. A lot of people dropped the manhwa when Ruve became more and more prominent. Even to this day, most commentators say they'd rather have Alendis or Karsane as the male lead. I like those two, but I wouldn't fully agree, because this entire story hinges on Ruve being central. As the most high-ranking guy with a good-looking design, he had to be the male lead by default. I mean, seriously. Did you think the female lead would pick a duke over a crown prince? Pfft. But on a more serious note, this pairing gives the story the most conflict and emotional stakes. It follows the main theme of the series, someone who's torn between fate and the desire to cut this red thread connecting them to their destined lover. This imagery is brought up again and again, so it couldn't just be ignored, just like the female lead's indecision between wishing to lead her own household and being empress. It depends on Ruve being her partner. Besides, one of the biggest obstacles in the series is obviously Jiun, someone who once challenged Aristia for Ruve's attention. The author obviously wouldn't just let her disappear to never be seen again, and as the main antagonist, she had to be in conflict with our female lead again. Therefore, of course, both need to be around Ruve once more. Ruve needs to be endgame for Jiun's appearance to be an obstacle, for the political pressure to weigh on Aristia, and for our female lead's drama to be fully tapped into. The problem is more how he and his relationship with Aristia was written over the course of the series. Just for comparison, look at Your Majesty, Please Don't Kill Me Again. This manhwa also started with the male lead executing our female lead and her going back in time but falling for him later. Readers really liked this one though, mostly because the male lead actually had a reason to execute the female lead and her family, and because he wasn't so smug about it. He just did it to protect himself, essentially. Which leads to this series' biggest pitfall. Those first 6 chapters of the manhwa are great. They made readers care for Aristia's well-being, pray for her future, and present her enemies. The problem is that they clearly set up Ruve as an abusive asshole, someone who would usually be an antagonist later, only for the story to switch up and have Aristia return to Ruve, which felt like an insult to a lot of people. Here are some Reddit comments on the matter. I know you said not to say trauma evaporation, but that is literally why. Having the female lead go through all of that just to end up with the man who murdered her father, mocked her to her face about it, and then murdered her, plus everything else, was just frustrating after everything she did to avoid it. It kinda felt like a slap to the face, especially when we were introduced to a much better male lead. When I was told who the male lead was, I dropped it immediately. I don't know, if anyone tells me to lick their boots, I'm never going back to them. Or I might even just go back and ruin their entire family. I can't speak for anyone else, but I dropped it when I read the spoilers for it that she got together with the piece of shit crown prince. Did not waste my time on it, thank goodness. I can't say I disagree with them. Those first 6 chapters are doing what the author wanted them to show our female lead suffering. The problem is that they overdo it so much that they ruin Ruve for the rest of the series and give little to no reason why he would act in such a way. I would even go as far as to say that it does a disservice to him by using him as a plot device instead of a character. The first timeline not only presents Ruve as dumb, unable to do politics, but also as completely evil and selfish. Ruve has no reason to constantly torment Aristia when she is so obsessed with him. He just does it because he's a little jealous. It's almost comedic how far he goes just to break Aristia's confidence even more, seemingly taking sadistic joy out of torturing her. And at the end, he even grins at her execution. It feels exaggerated, meaningless, and completely out of character with how we see Ruve later. I very much think that the author didn't plan ahead when they wrote Aristia's traumatic backstory, which is unfortunate, because Ruve didn't have to be a grinning madman for Aristia to have a tragic backstory. Well, at least not if you wanted him to seem just a little misunderstood later. Ruve didn't need to constantly yell at Aristia. Ignoring her in favor of his lover would have hurt her enough. He also could have been characterized as someone who focuses on politics and rules with a heavy hand, neglecting emotions and everything else in the meantime. He did not need to abuse Aristia at every opportunity. Plus, the entire ordeal with Marcus Monique. Where do I start? Oh boy. In what world would Ruve be so callous about Aristia's father allegedly killing Jiun's child? House Monique was a long-time political supporter of the crown. I can't imagine a young emperor being smug after being betrayed in such a vile way and needing to execute one of your most powerful pawns here. You should be devastated. He just lost 2 children. It doesn't make sense. Why not make Ruve show a little remorse here, trying to avoid Aristia's gaze as she begs him for a second chance and drops to her knees? Why make him force her to kneel and kiss his shoe? That No one does that unless they're literally a deranged sadist. And given how cold he reacted to the deaths of his children, the story makes you believe that Ruve might be one. But the story does not allow him to be so flawed later, so why write him like that in this scene? Aristia still could have attacked him in her grief, despite him being a normal person about the situation. Then she would have been executed, and Ruve could have been, again, a normal person about that too, looking at her with regret. People would still have hated him, but I'm sure they might have given him a chance if he was characterized as anything but a dude who smirks at the woman he tormented for years being beheaded. That's where I believe the author went wrong. They set up a very impactful dark beginning, but unfortunately our male lead was a bit too vile to fit into the taste of the average reader. This brings us to the next problem, which I would call Ruve develops a split personality. Toxic relationships are interesting and can be explored in fiction, so I'm one of the few people who wouldn't have minded Ruve being the male lead, even after his barrage of crimes in the first few chapters. However, if this was meant to happen, the story would have needed to be much darker. The author would have needed to keep Ruve evil, to acknowledge that Aristia and Ruve have an unhealthy relationship, and that it wasn't about her fault but his, and that he won't really change. This was not the case in the second timeline. In fact, The Abandoned Empress takes its time to develop Ruve into an almost perfect male lead. Because the author suddenly remembered that readers are supposed to like this guy, Ruve acts cold and moody for a few chapters, but constantly thinks about or worries about Aristia. When she avoids him, he just falls for her anyway and then starts doing everything for her, even when she barely returns a crumb of affection. Look at this. He acts like a puppy. People would not understand or the bus if they had just skipped the first 6 chapters. He feels like a completely different person. The story tries to justify that change by explaining that Aristia influenced his childhood enough to alter his personality that much. But given that she actually avoids him as much as possible, I don't really buy that. I'm also a little sad that the story didn't utilize this obvious obstacle in our lead's romantic journey. The second timeline could easily make Ruve a better person, but I feel like he should have displayed some of the arrogance, brashness, and maybe even sadism towards those he considers his enemies over the course of the series. He did that this one time with the princess at the ball, but that was kinda lax too. Him repeatedly showing negative traits Aristia fears could have slowed down their relationship without making it seem like she's just flip-flopping around for no reason. The only big flaw the Ruve from this timeline really shows is repeatedly ignoring Aristia's requests to break off their engagement, which, yeah, he kinda can't do that when his father is about to die and he desperately needs her family's support to secure his reign. What I think the author was going for was clarifying that the Ruve from the first timeline and the second one are different people, which would justify Aristia getting back to him after all the abuse he put her through. The problem is that few people read it that way, especially considering that the switch up feels weird and baseless. I mean, you can't just heal a sociopath by avoiding him and fainting whenever he comes close. Right? Either way, this change fundamentally does not work with the beginning presented to the readers. If you wish to write a male lead who assaults the female lead in the first few chapters, you cannot hold your punches and then pretend the abuser was simply led astray, or misunderstood, or controlled by black magic, or, a poison that miraculously doesn't affect anyone but him. We'll get back to that later. I think Ruve was much too sadistic in the first timeline for him to be utilized in the lighter love story the author intended. No amount of justification would have made up for that, aside from maybe the sudden appearance of an evil twin brother. Readers who wish for dark romance and toxic themes might enjoy the start and stick around, but the rest of the series wasn't written for those audiences, marking the second mistake of the author. The third, I believe, was making Ruve fight an uphill battle for the rest of the manhwa. While Kalsane and Elendis get to make first good impressions, Ruve gets, and after that he barely gets to talk to Aristia for countless chapters. When he does, he admonishes her instantly. No wonder readers like the other guys better. It wasn't 100% clear who the male lead would be at that point, and so people picked favorites and willfully ignored all the signs implying who it would really be. Naturally, most didn't favor the abuser from the first timeline. This was only made worse by the fact that Aristia keeps acting coy for like 140 chapters, so we only get to find out relatively late. Ruve absolutely needed time to get back in everyone's good graces after that start, which the author should have been well aware of. And yet the manhwa cut out important scenes between the two that might have made the readers more sympathetic to Ruve in favor of focusing on forgettable side characters, of which the series has far too many. And a more personal complaint, I know that no one aside from me cares about this, but I hate that Ruve's aunt is never dealt with. Like, we're told that she's the reason Ruve started to hate Aristia because she kept emotionally abusing a small child, and yet we never see see anyone rebuke her, nor does Aristia ever really find out about this. I kinda wish someone had told her off because she gets out of this scot-free. Why is no one talking about this woman? This is literally the worst character in the novel. Why is she beefing with a 14-year-old who happens to be her nephew? She's proud of herself for it too. Your Highness, I see you've read so many difficult books. Oh yes, I have. I try my best. Shameful. I cannot hide my disappointment at your laziness. Your father was much better as a child. You have a long way to go if you don't want to tarnish the reputation of your dead mother. At least your fiancé is capable. Lady Aristia is so clever and you can't compare. He got all of that because he said hello to her. I wish I was exaggerating. Also, Ruve's father, an absolute deadbeat. He just neglects his son despite refusing to let him see his real mother and ignores that his stepmother hates him. Is this entire family just chronically insane? No wonder this guy turned out wrong. Anyway, this doesn't justify anything Ruve did in the first timeline. I do, however, find it weird that Aristia has a positive opinion of this useless deadbeat father for the entire run of the manhwa, and that Ruve's aunt also never gets any backlash. The people who emotionally neglected and abused a child get away without even a slap to the back of their hands. It was such a waste of potential. Aristia suffers in the first timeline but comes back and swears to live life for herself, to learn sword fighting, inherit her father's position, and is even blessed by a goddess to pioneer the world. And then a time skip later, she does absolutely nothing. I kept reading hoping for something. She never beats anyone on screen with her sword fighting skills, she did nothing for June's arrival, she doesn't push to inherit House Monique. Another complaint that unfortunately held true. Aristia starts her second life with grand promises of what she wants to do, that she won't love Ruve again, that she will live freely and become a knight, and then most events happen to the female lead. She barely fights for her goals and just kind of tells everyone that she wants to break her engagement off. She also puts in very little effort to do anything she doesn't want to do in this moment, and instead of being viewed as selfish for ruining her relationship with the crown, people admire her for it. Another issue. It's really weird how easily everyone happens to adore Aristia, even when she did very little or nothing special at all. This is normal for romance manhwas, but it's really extreme in this story. Everyone tries to play up how capable Aristia is, but we barely get to see that side of her. Instead, everyone keeps talking about how great she is to make Ruve jealous of her and to feel his disdain, which works somewhat well, because by the end of this manhwa, I was also annoyed with how often everyone was glazing Aristia. Like, there's numerous scenes where random background characters like the knights compare her to an angel, bring her mountains of gifts, and stuff like that. It's okay to have some filler scenes, but it did feel a little on the nose here, which I think highlights another problem. The author doesn't let Aristia be wrong. Everything she does has to be read as warm-hearted, saintly, or intelligent. In contrast, this forces all other characters, who might not be as devoted to her, to be objectively wrong or evil. Unfortunately, this makes her a very uninteresting character. I would argue that Ruve, Alandis, and June are entertaining because they are a mess, followed by Karsane, who is less of a mess and just a pleasant character all around. Aristia is just there. Without doing too much for it, in fact, Aristia spends most of the manhwa letting other people fuss over her without returning much affection at all, she gets a dozen compliments each chapter. The problem is, most compliments are shown to be fake. We are told that Aristia was raised to be the Empress, and that she actually filled in that role for at least 1 or 2 years in her previous life. We never see any of that political savviness though. Whenever the story needs her to be naive, she's completely unaware of the political repercussions of her actions, specifically in regards to Karsane and Alandis. As an empress, she should be able to read people around her, and yet she doesn't realize that those two are in love with her, probably because the author thought it would be funny. Aristia also doesn't understand that spending so much time with 2 men when she's engaged to someone else would raise eyebrows. Meanwhile, Ruve is the one handling all political matters during the story. He barely gets any praise for it though, even when he saves Aristia from social ruin for her almost affairs. Aside from her indifference, Aristia also goes out of her way to cause political problems because she refuses to think about anything but her own goals and is never called out on it. For example, when she wants to end her engagement with Ruve just after his coronation. Knowing that Jiyun is the other candidate, stepping away would cause Ruve and the Empire, but also House Monique, to suffer, because Duke Xena would be able to control the next Empress. The Imperial faction cannot risk losing this battle, and Ruve cannot end this engagement when he is currently in grave danger as well. But yet, Aristia publicly announces that she will withdraw without a warning to anyone, and then gets mad when Ruve doesn't get the engagement broken off yesterday. Listen, I get that Aristia has the right to focus on herself more in this life, but it does feel weird to constantly have her claim that she cares about the nation so much, when she does everything she can to fuck the situation up. Even as the head of House Monique, she would be the Emperor's closest ally. She cannot afford to ignore the political landscape. Not if she is serious about taking over her father's title, that is. She cannot want Jiun to be Empress either, because she knows that this girl hates her and is very willing to cause her problems. Having Aristia ignore all of that makes her look quite stupid. Then the author remembers that she is meant to be clever, and suddenly she does a lot of plotting, but still doesn't see the problems that might come from Jiun being Empress. Like I said, Aristia is whatever the story needs her to be, and it doesn't always make sense. The female lead is traumatized. This explains why she might have strong emotions about certain people, change moods rapidly, or do inexplicable things. Despite that, her character feels wildly incoherent at certain times, like in regards to her confidence and emotional stability, or her interest in politics. One chapter, she silences all her enemies with a few easy words. The next, she acts like a child when she overhears someone mocking her. She rapidly switches between wanting Ruve, fearing him, being jealous of other women near him, and then acting coy again when he confesses his love. It makes sense for her to doubt them, but it was very painful to read. Instead of having her go back to point zero the entire time, a steady improvement of their relationship might have been better. The last 30 chapters are very painful, to the point where I groaned out loud a few times. At this point, Aristia essentially just constantly rejects Ruve and then won't throw him a bone when he offers her literally everything he owns. This would be fine if she really doesn't want him, but if she was going to end up with him, why not give us the last 20 chapters with them, I don't know, working together? They're both capable, at least sometimes, so anytime Aristia actually played along, we had a very powerful couple here. I like drama too, but bye Vita. This was too frustrating at the end. Especially because Aristia reaches none of the goals she started with. She's barely shown sword fighting anymore at the end, and while she gets to be the head of House Monique too, she becomes Empress first and foremost. She also returns to loving Ruve despite originally fearing him. Of course, after pushing him away for 30 chapters straight. She never gets to free herself from her fate or rewrite history. In a story about the inevitability of your future, this might work, and the author does go for this explanation with the entire symbolism of red strings and predetermined fates. Because Aristia made such a big deal out of defying that fate, it feels like the entire journey becomes meaningless. She got a divine name so that she could change her fate in the first place. How come she never does anything? In general, more often than not, characters in this novel bend over backwards to justify the plot. This applies to Aristia and Ruve, but they are by far not the only characters acting this weird. The first and certainly most grating example, Vita. This god claims that they wish to help Thea, only to keep throwing obstacles in her path. If she was meant to be with Ruve, why send a Satanus who wants to steal his affection? Why let Ruve be a complete shithead to Thea the entire time and then make her redo the entire thing when he fucked it up? Why not, I don't know, strike down their enemies for them? Warn Aristia about the poison on Jiun's arrival? Tell Ruve to get his act together? Why let your Satanus be the other woman? It's confusing. Vita also gives Aristia a divine name. A name meant to make her take control of her own fate. But we do know how that ends up. So really, Vita was just messing around. If they wanted her to be happy, why didn't they just intervene in the first timeline? And why give Jiun a divine name too and watch her be used by people who want to kill both of your favorite children? It feels like Vita just wants to watch a soap opera and not see happy endings. And mentioning Jiun. Jiun is an incredibly compelling plot device. Her appearance is one of the best scenes in the manhwa. How she falls into Ruve's arms and mimics the panel from the start of the series, how off she acts, how she then directly confronts Aristia and chooses to support the crown's enemies. She's terrifying those first few chapters. The problem is that she doesn't do anything after that. As an author, this is a well-known problem to me. You have some badass scenes in mind, some cool character conflict, but the in-between is kinda muddy. You only make the antagonists act when they are on screen and forget that they should actually plot outside of what the female lead sees. This of course works with you sparingly. The problem is that it's very obvious with Jiun and all other antagonists because they are never allowed to plot, have any advantage or victory. Aside from that, Jeong also has no reason to resent Aristia, but just blames her for no reason. She also claims to not be interested in Ruve again, but whenever given the chance, swarms around him and is genuinely upset when he sends her away. Meanwhile, she spends most of the time provoking Aristia and picking fights. Her character started out very interestingly, with her also having a sympathetic backstory, but for most chapters in the second timeline, she just ends up being stupid, immature, and aimless. I do like her ending, but I feel like she could have been utilized better. Next one, Alandis. As someone who loves yandere characters, I wasn't particularly bothered when he turned out to be insane. I was, however, bothered by his sudden stupidity after Aristia's argument with him. Why exactly would Alandis want to help someone who is very much poisoning his beloved and trying to end her life? Why did he not think he would be trialed for treason if caught? I don't know. I think Alandis also doesn't know because the author called him a genius, but then made him do the stupidest thing. I mean, sure, he did lose his mind due to his obsession, but come on, that was really dumb and he didn't reach any goal at all. He just got himself exiled. He could have stayed and been a double spy, but of course the author just needed an excuse to send him away. But I do like Alandis from the first season. I also really like the scene where Aristia confesses the truth to him after working up her courage. As a reader, I was fully convinced that Alandis would actually believe her. He had seemed so devoted before. He even swears that he will believe her whatever she says, only to let her down the moment she asks him to challenge his worldview in her favor. It's a very clever way to signal that this is not someone Aristia can spend her life with, because in the end he will value what he believes in more than Aristia's word, because he sees her as an accessory at most, as a person who should never change but stay frozen in time as weak and naive for him. In contrast, Ruve, despite only reading a letter not meant for him in the first place, seems to believe Aristia instinctively, even if she calls her first life a dream. I presume this was meant to mirror the two of them, to show that Ruve, despite everything, sincerely trusts Aristia and is willing to challenge his own flaws for her. It might have worked if he hadn't, tortured her so much in the first 6 chapters anyway. Duke Zena. I wanted to say something about this guy, but really he feels like a wasted character. He never shows any traits aside from being hot-headed and yelling at people. He sure isn't good at hiding his disdain for someone who is meant to be the mastermind behind everything. I don't think anyone cares much about this guy, and again, he also doesn't do much. He makes some snide comments towards Aristia, and then the rest happens off-screen. I don't know. I wish I could say more about our main antagonist. I can't. Which leads us to random NPCs no one cares about. The biggest issue of the story outside of Ruve. The story introduces a lot of side characters that weren't needed. Some were background decoration. Most just took screen time away from our main couple, which, as we know, desperately needed more time to develop. This includes all those villainous aristocrats, random gossiping noble ladies, Alandis' brother, Ruve's aunt, and Marcus Manhwa. When he suddenly helps the crown, it doesn't do anything. I would have enjoyed seeing a character we actually care about pull a stunt like this, but he barely mattered, so it just kind of happened. And then the story makes a random knight betray Aristia? That didn't hurt either. I don't even remember that guy. Also, in that vein, the entire princess's arc is there. Some of the characters are interesting in their own right, but they sidelined our main story far too much. They were mainly used as a plot device to affirm that Ruve wants Tia and Tia only and will refuse all other women. We already have Jeong to symbolize that conflict in a much more personal way though. Why add half a dozen new characters just to show that again? I feel like, among the many things this manhwa left out, they really had no reason to keep this in. Especially not if the alternative had been more Ruve x Tia scenes. Or more Jeong. Or more time to write certain developments without the use of Deus ex machinas. Deus ex machina, according to Wikipedia, a plot device in which a seemingly unsolvable problem in the story is suddenly or abruptly resolved by an unexpected and unlikely occurrence. This is another of the series' greatest sins, because over its 150 chapter runtime, it doesn't happen once or twice, but at least 3 times. Tell me if you find any more examples of it, because I'm sure they exist. Number 1. The poison. When it was revealed that Aristia was being poisoned and that this was most likely causing her infertility, that was an okay development. It made sense for the enemies of the crown to target her. What did not make sense was the reveal that Ruve was being poisoned too, and that most of his actions during the first timeline were heavily influenced by said poison. Did you accidentally write your male lead as an abuser who assaults the female lead and executes her? Oops. Simply say that he was mind-controlled, that a random poison made him lose his temper and act on impulses. First of all, what a cop-out. Either make the male lead a toxic bastard or don't touch that topic at all. Secondly, that's not how you argue someone is innocent. I mean, he still did those things. Not just once or twice, but over the course of a long time. I could forgive him insulting or maybe even pushing Aristia away a couple of times because he is drugged, but everything else? Yeah. This is not only an insult to your audience, it also came out of left field and made little sense in the story. After all, Aristia was being drugged too. And yet, she managed to function just fine. That being said, I don't hate the poison in itself. I actually like the idea that the imperial couple was manipulated because of it, but this poison should not affect two characters completely differently. If Ruve was going to turn into a literal monster because of it, Aristia should have too. Having her act out and being unable to control her emotions would, to me, even make the first timeline work better. It would justify everyone turning their backs on her and her constant arguing with Ruve and Jiun. It would make those two's treatment of Aristia feel less like they were fighting windmills, perhaps. Then Ruve could come out of the scenario without looking like a psychopath or hating someone who never even looked at him wrong. Which would also make the romance later feel more acceptable if the abuse had been two-sided. But seemingly, the author didn't want to let Aristia be wrong in the slightest. She had to be completely innocent, and so Ruve had to be magically turned into a different person because of this poison. Some people might disagree here on this, but this is my opinion. The Blood Vow. Probably an even worse example. Halfway through the story, we find out that House Monique alone has special magic and can make a so-called blood vow, a binding oath of loyalty to the Emperor. This forces obedience at the possibility of death if ignored. This is a very powerful tool. Much too powerful for any member of the Monique household not to do it immediately as soon as they turn like 10 years old. The fact that Aristia's father had to be blackmailed into doing it is insane, because any monarch would force the heir of the house to do this oath immediately, including Aristia. Like this, they would be making sure that at least one household, and your own empress, can't betray you, which is incredible, especially in times of political unrest, which points out a problem regarding the first timeline too, I believe. We know that Aristia's father made such a blood vow, but how exactly could he have hurt Ruve and Jiun's child if he had made that blood vow? He shouldn't be able to go against the royal bloodline, right? Did Marcus Monique just vow to the previous emperor and was freed from that vow when the guy died? Did he not renew it for Ruve? That seems unacceptable. I'm fairly sure any emperor would have forced him to do it again. So what happened here? Please someone explain? The only good use for this plot device is when Ruve later makes a romantic vow towards Aristia and swears that she will be his one and only and that he will never betray her. Most likely this was just written because the author feared that readers wouldn't trust him otherwise though. Which, yeah, this guy doesn't have the best track record. Aside from that, it doesn't seem to be very thought through. But this is still not as bad as Divine Wishes. It's bad enough that the story introduces magic halfway through the story. Then we also get a high priest who only appears to keep helping Aristia cheese the system in a world that shows almost no signs of magic otherwise. This is frankly, from a writer's perspective, bullshit. It allows the story to give us the cheap scare of taking away Carson's eyesight, only to return it half a chapter later. I'm a sucker for perfectly happy endings, so I don't necessarily want Carson to be blind, but having him lose at least one eye would have felt more grave. And then the story does the same thing again by making Aristia struggle with infertility and then suddenly saying, oh yay, she can have children again because this guy put his hand onto her forehead a couple of times. Maybe this is cruel, but I would, for once, like to see a story where this problem doesn't get magically fixed or turn out to be a misunderstanding. Well, I guess I'm happy for Aristia. Not sure if I think Ruve should have children and spread whatever is wrong with him and his family, but oh well. The Abandoned Empress is one of the earliest works in the Ottoman isekai genre, with incredibly nice art and memorable characters. It does a lot right, but that also highlights its mistakes when it doesn't. Most readers thought it would be a story about revenge, or at least about moving on. Instead, it was meant to be about fated love. Perfect fated love that is capable of changing you into a better person if you let it. It also seems concerned with showing how different life paths might alter someone's personality to the point where they could be called a different person. Unfortunately, the author couldn't convince most of the audience of that change. partly because far too little time was actually allocated on Ruve's childhood, his problems and his development, and likewise his moments with Aristia. Plus, for the type of the story this manhwa wanted to tell, his first impression was simply too bad, making all the fluffy scenes with the female lead after feel like an uphill battle against the reader's hatred. This was not a fight even the best author could win, especially not if they failed to make the male lead abundantly clear as soon as possible, and offer two much more likable candidates in the process. When readers form an expectation about a certain work of fiction and are disappointed, that will only make their opinion of the work worse. In this case, people got attached to Karsane and the Landis only to be disappointed. Aside from that, the story puts in far too many unimportant side characters. The pace in the third season caused a lot of narrative flaws too, but the handling of the series' antagonists and numerous plot devices that feel like convenient miracles added the final nail in the coffin. It's not perfect, to say the least. But nevertheless, I did enjoy it. I'm not sure it was obvious when I wrote like 20k words criticizing it, but I read it for the 4th time or so for this essay. It's one of the few manhwa I like to revisit. Why do I care about this specific piece so much? I don't know. It's by divine intervention, I guess. Come on, that was funny. But anyway, feel free to tell me if you ever read this manhwa and if you are passionate about it. In love or in hate, it doesn't really matter. If you want to hear more about the Abandoned Empress, check out Weebtuna's videos on this series. They focus on the nature of Aristia's relationship with Landis and Karsane, who I side-eyed a bit, and the political situation of the Empire. The entire series made me laugh a lot. But that's enough from me for now. I'll say my farewell and see you next time. Bye! Marcus Milieu? Ah? Milieu? Milieu.